My family demanded I give my house to my pregnant sister. Then I found out they owed money to a drug lord. I never thought owning a house would feel this way, both triumphant and hollow at the same time. At 34, I'd finally done it. My own place, my own name on the deed. 15 years of grinding, saving every penny since I was a teenager. No handouts, no family support, just me, Jacob Walsh, making it happen. The house isn't anything spectacular, 3 bedrooms, decent yard, quiet neighborhood, but it's mine. Every nail, every floorboard represents years of sacrifice. I almost didn't invite them. Dad, David, has never shown much interest in my life, and Marissa, my stepmother, has perfected the art of tolerating me with a tight smile. But something in me still craved their approval, so I sent the invitation. "Nice place," Dad said, eyes scanning my living room with an appraiser's gaze. "What did this set you back?" The question felt loaded, like a trap. "Market rate," I answered, keeping it vague. "Coffee?" Dad wandered around, tapping walls, peering at fixtures. "Seems like a lot of house for one person. Probably overpaid?" Marissa inspected my kitchen with barely disguised judgment. My half-sister Ashlyn followed, rubbing her slightly swollen belly with one hand while texting with the other. "So," Dad said, lowering his voice as he cornered me by the hallway, "Ashlyn's in a situation." I felt the familiar weight settle in my stomach. Every family gathering eventually circled back to Ashlyn's latest crisis. "The boyfriend's gone," he continued. "She needs somewhere stable before the baby comes." There it was. I caught the shared glances between Dad and Marissa, the practiced concern that masked expectation. Ashlyn had always floated through life on charm and excuses. "I'm just not built for the 9-to-5 grind," she'd say, laughing, while Dad bailed her out of another financial mess. Now she stood in my new kitchen, pregnant, homeless, and somehow, judging by my father's tone, about to become my responsibility. "We're just worried about her being alone," Marissa added, joining us. I nodded, feeling the walls of my new home suddenly shrink. Dad's eyes held something beyond concern. Was it envy? Desperation? What weren't they telling me about Ashlyn's situation? And was her pregnancy even real or another card played at the perfect moment? I'd seen this game before, but never with stakes this high. The call came exactly 1 week after the housewarming. My father's voice sounded strained, almost rehearsed. "Jacob, we need to talk. Can you come by tonight?" For a split second, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he wanted to apologize for his behavior at my house. Maybe, after all these years, we could finally have an honest conversation. I was a fool. When I arrived, Dad, Marissa, and Ashlyn were arranged in the living room like figures in a wax museum. Nobody smiled. Nobody stood to greet me. The setup felt like an intervention, with me as the unwitting subject. "Sit down, son," Dad said, motioning to the lone chair across from them. I remained standing. "What's this about?" Dad cleared his throat. "Ashlyn needs a place to stay. The baby is coming in a few months and she can't manage on her own." My stomach dropped. "She can't find an apartment?" "She needs family," Marissa interjected, her hand protectively on Ashlyn's shoulder. "She needs stability." "And?" I asked, though I already knew where this was headed. Dad leaned forward. "Your house has 3 bedrooms. You're just one person." "You want me to take her in?" I asked, incredulous. "It's what brothers do," Dad said with finality. "They protect their sisters." I looked at Ashlyn, who was studying her fingernails with practiced indifference. 26 years old and had never held a job longer than 3 months. "Why can't she stay here?" I asked. "That's not possible," Dad snapped too quickly. The conversation continued with a surreal quality, as if we were all reading from a script. All except me. I hadn't gotten my lines. Later that night, I stepped onto the porch for air and overheard Ashlyn on the phone through an open window. "It's going exactly like we said," she whispered tensely. "He's resistant, but Dad's pushing hard. No, I don't think he suspects anything. I know what I'm doing, okay? Just stick to the plan." When she saw me watching, she ended the call abruptly, her face unreadable in the dim light. The next day, Dad escalated. "You need to move out temporarily. Let Ashlyn stay in your house." "What?" I nearly shouted. "You want me to leave my own home?" Just until she gets on her feet, he insisted. If you don't help, don't expect anything from this family again. Marissa nodded silently, her arms crossed. Something clicked then. The urgency, the bizarre request, the secretive calls. This isn't about Ashlyn needing a place, I said slowly, watching their expressions. There's something else going on. Dad's face hardened. Don't make this difficult, Jacob. Who's the father? I asked Ashlyn directly. Why doesn't he help? Ashlyn's eyes flashed with something, fear, anger. You don't know anything about my situation. Then explain it to me, I challenged. Because none of this makes any sense. Why do I have to leave my house for you? What aren't you telling me? The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, I saw the three of them exchange glances, not of confusion, but of panic. I couldn't sleep that night, replaying the strange confrontation in my head. Their desperation felt wrong, calculated rather than caring. By morning, I'd made a decision. I needed to know who my half-sister really was. I started with social media, expecting the usual filtered vacation photos and inspirational quotes. What I found instead made my coffee go cold in my hand. The OnlyFans account wasn't using her real name, but the face was unmistakable. Ashlyn, my father's precious daughter, had been selling explicit content online for at least 2 years. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I scrolled through her followers, recognizing names of guys from our hometown. One was Ryan Mitchell, who had dated Ashlyn briefly in high school. I reached out, hoping for insight. Yeah, man, I was surprised to see you at her birthday last year, Ryan said when we met for a beer. Thought you'd cut ties after everything that went down. I kept my face neutral. Refresh my memory. Lot of drama with Ashlyn. Ryan laughed bitterly. That's putting it mildly. After she started working for that club owner, Dante something, she changed. Got into some heavy stuff. Your dad bailed her out of trouble so many times. He leaned closer. You really don't know, do you? I shook my head, stomach tightening. Man, I shouldn't be the one telling you this, he said, then sighed. Look, Dante wasn't just her boss. She was moving product for him. Got caught once, but charges mysteriously disappeared. He tapped his glass. Your dad has connections. My world tilted sideways. Drug dealing? My father covering up crimes? When I returned home, Ashlyn was sitting on my porch. Talking to my old friends now? She asked, arms crossed over her baby bump. That's kind of pathetic, Jake. I held up my phone with her OnlyFans page. Almost as pathetic as hiding this from the family. I expected shame, denial, maybe tears. Instead, Ashlyn laughed. You think Dad doesn't know? Where do you think my college tuition went? She stood up, defiant. I make good money. I'm not ashamed. And Dante? I pressed. Ryan told me about your side business. Her smile vanished. Ryan needs to shut his mouth. That was a long time ago. Is the baby even real? I asked. Her hand went to her stomach, eyes flashing. Feel it kick if you don't believe me, but don't pretend you suddenly care about my life. Then why do you need my house? She just turned and walked away. The next morning, I drove to my father's house, determined to end the charade. He was in the garage organizing tools with methodical precision. We need to talk, I said. About Ashlyn's OnlyFans account. About Dante. About whatever the hell is going on that you're not telling me. Dad's shoulders stiffened. You always were too nosy for your own good. My house is on the line here. I deserve answers. He slammed a wrench onto the workbench. You think you deserve anything after all I've done for this family? What have you done exactly? I challenged. Cover up Ashlyn's drug dealing? Use your connections to make charges disappear? His face paled, then reddened with fury. You don't understand anything. Family protects family. Something you clearly never learned. That's not protection, that's enabling, I said. And now you want me to be part of whatever scheme you're running. Get out, he hissed, pointing to the door. I stood my ground. Not until you tell me what's really happening with Ashlyn. Who's the father? What trouble is she in this time? Dad moved closer, his voice dropping dangerously. Some questions are better left unasked, Jacob. I left, but not to retreat. I drove straight to Ashlyn's apartment, determined to get the truth. Ashlyn's apartment complex was run down but not decrepit. Exactly the kind of place where people minded their own business. Perfect for someone hiding from their past. or present. She answered the door in sweatpants, her pregnancy more pronounced than I remembered. "Come to interrogate me some more?" she asked, but stepped aside to let me in. Her place was surprisingly tidy. No drugs or paraphernalia in sight, just a small living room with minimal furniture and framed photos of landscapes. No people. "I'm not here to judge," I began, taking a seat on her worn couch. "But I need to understand what's happening. Why does Dad want me to give up my house for you?" Ashlyn's defensive posture softened slightly. She sat across from me, one hand absently stroking her belly. "You've always had it together," she said, her voice flat. "The golden child who got away." "I was never the golden child," I laughed bitterly. "Dad barely noticed me." "At least he didn't notice you in the wrong ways," she muttered, then caught herself. "Look, the OnlyFans thing? Yeah, I do that. The stuff with Dante? Ancient history. I made choices to survive. By selling drugs?" Her eyes hardened. "By doing whatever I had to. You think minimum wage jobs were lining up to hire a high school dropout? Dad's connections helped me stay out of jail, but he made sure I knew how much I owed him for it." The implication hung in the air between us. "And now?" I pressed. "What's going on now that requires my house?" She looked away. "I'm trying to start over, for real this time." "That doesn't explain why Dad's pushing so hard for me to sign over my house." "You'll have to ask him," she said, effectively ending our conversation. Meanwhile, Dad escalated his campaign. The calls became more frequent, more insistent, sometimes late at night, sometimes during work hours. "We need to finalize the arrangement," he insisted during one call. "Ashlyn needs certainty." "What arrangement?" "I haven't agreed to anything," I replied. "Don't be selfish, Jacob. Family takes care of family." That phrase again, his universal justification. But something in his tone triggered a memory. I'd heard those exact words, in that exact tone, years ago when he was on the phone with someone he feared. When Dad invited me over again, Marissa greeted me at the door with unusual warmth. "Jacob, so good to see you," she said, touching my arm. "Your father's in his study." As I passed the kitchen, I noticed papers spread across the table, financial documents, quickly covered by Marissa's manicured hand. I caught glimpses of bank statements, property records, and a name that made my blood freeze: Dante Vasquez. Dad sat behind his desk, looking haggard but determined. "I've prepared the paperwork," he said without preamble. "You'll transfer ownership of your house to Ashlyn, and we'll help you find a new place." "You're not just asking me to let her stay anymore," I said, stunned. "You want me to give her my house? Are you insane?" "It's the right thing to do," he insisted. "For who? For Ashlyn? For you? Certainly not for me." "For all of us," he snapped. "Some debts can't be ignored, Jacob. Some people don't take no for an answer." "Is this about Dante?" I asked. The color drained from his face. "Where did you hear that name? What does he have to do with this? Is Ashlyn still working for him? Is the baby his?" Dad stood up, knocking over his chair. "You need to sign these papers and stop asking questions. This is your last chance to do the right thing." I stood too, my resolve hardening. "No. No? I'm not giving up my house. Not for Ashlyn, not for you, not for anyone. Whatever mess you've gotten into with Dante, that's your problem." "You ungrateful," he choked on his rage, "after everything I've done for you." "What have you ever done for me?" I shot back. "I built my life without you. I bought that house without your help. And now you'll lose everything," he threatened. "Is that what you want?" "What I want," I said, moving toward the door, "is the truth. But clearly, that's too much to ask from this family." As I left, I heard something I never expected. My father crying. Not in sorrow, but in fear. I spent the night researching Dante Vasquez. The name appeared in news articles from 3 years ago. Suspected drug trafficking, money laundering, charges mysteriously dropped. In every photo, he looked more like a businessman than a criminal, always in tailored suits with an easy smile. The kind of man who made problems disappear. By morning, I'd made my decision. This had gone far enough. I drove to my father's house unannounced. Both cars were in the driveway. Perfect. I needed answers from both of them. Dad opened the door, surprise quickly morphing into wariness. "Jacob, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk, all of us." I pushed past him into the living room where Marissa sat with her morning coffee. She froze when she saw me. "I'm done being manipulated," I said, standing so I could see them both. "You've been pressuring me for weeks to hand over my house to Ashlyn, not to let her stay, to give it to her. I want to know why." "We've explained," Dad began. "No," I cut him off. "You've lied. I know about Dante Vasquez." The name landed like a bomb. Marissa's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. "I don't know what you think," Dad attempted again. "Stop, just stop." My voice was steady now. "What does Ashlyn owe him? What do you owe him? And why is my house suddenly the solution?" Dad's face hardened. "You've always been so selfish, Jacob. Your sister needs help and you can't even—" "David, enough!" Marissa's voice sliced through his tirade. She set down her cup with deliberate care. "He knows too much already." She turned to me, her expression calculating. "Ashlyn made some poor choices. Dante owns the debts she accumulated. Substantial debts. He's been patient, but his patience is running out. And my house? An asset." Her matter-of-factness chilled me. "Something of value to appease him. You were going to give my house to a drug dealer to pay off Ashlyn's debts?" The absurdity of it made me laugh. "Did you think I wouldn't notice when my name disappeared from the deed?" Dad slumped into a chair. "You don't understand what we're dealing with." "Then explain it to me." Neither answered. "I thought so." I headed for the door, then paused. "I'm going to talk to Ashlyn. One last time." I found her at a cafe downtown, her pregnancy making her easy to spot. She looked up from her phone, unsurprised. "They called to warn me you're on the warpath," she said. I sat across from her. "Tell me the truth. All of it." Something in my tone must have reached her. She set down her phone. "I was 19 when I met Dante. He was charming, powerful, made me feel special." Her voice was flat. "I started escorting for him. High-end clients, good money. Then came the drugs, the debts. By 22, I owed him more than I could ever repay. And Dad? Stepped in to help, used his connections to make my charges disappear." Her hand went to her stomach. "But Dante doesn't forget debts. He just extends them." "Is the baby his?" She laughed bitterly. "God, no. The baby is real, but the father's just some client who wasn't careful. Dante doesn't know that part." "And my house?" "Marissa's idea. She thought if you signed it over to me, we could use it to settle with Dante." Ashlyn met my eyes. "I told them you wouldn't do it." "You knew me better than they did." "I've always known you, Jake, the good brother, the responsible one." She looked down. "I'm sorry." The words surprised me, but not as much as the tears in her eyes. I made my final decision that afternoon. I called my father from my car. "I'm not giving up my house," I said without preamble. "Jacob, please. I'll help Ashlyn another way. I'll pay for an apartment for her, for a year. I'll help her find work, but I won't be part of whatever scheme you've worked out with Dante." "You'll regret this," he said, his voice breaking. "You're abandoning your family." "No, Dad, you abandoned me long ago. I'm just finally accepting it." I hung up and blocked his number. Then Marissa's. Then, after a moment's hesitation, Ashlyn's too. Some families can't be saved. Some relationships aren't worth the cost. As painful as it was, I finally understood that protecting myself wasn't selfish. It was necessary. 3 months passed. I stayed in my house, and rebuilt my boundaries one brick at a time. Dad called twice. I let it go to voicemail both times. The first message was angry, full of guilt trips and veiled threats. The second, a month later, sounded defeated. "Jacob, we're handling things. You don't need to worry about us anymore." I wasn't. Spring turned the neighborhood green and I threw myself into home improvements. New deck? Fresh paint? I was sanding cabinets when my doorbell rang. Ashlyn stood on my porch, her pregnancy in its final stages. "Can I come in?" she asked. No demands this time. I hesitated, then nodded. She moved slowly to my couch, lowering herself with a grimace. "I'm not here to ask for anything," she said. "I just wanted to see you before I leave town." "Where are you going?" "Denver. Got a job offer from a friend. Office admin work." She attempted a smile. Boring and legitimate, First time for everything. What about Dante? Dad paid him off, sold the boat, cashed out his retirement. She shrugged. Mom's furious. I didn't correct her reference to Marissa as Mom. Some habits die hard. I'm sorry about everything, she continued. Not just the house thing, all of it. You deserved better than us. I didn't disagree, but I felt a strange hollowness where my anger had been. What about the baby? I asked. Her hand went to her stomach. I'm keeping her, trying to, anyway, one day at a time. After she left, I called Dad. When he answered, his voice was guarded. It's me, I said. Ashlyn was just here. Is she okay? She seems to be. Said you took care of the Dante situation. A heavy silence. I did what I had to do, what I should have done years ago instead of... He didn't finish. Instead of trying to use my house as payment? I was desperate. No excuse, just acknowledgement. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Good, because I'm not offering it. More silence. Take care of yourself, Dad. I hung up feeling lighter, as if I'd set down a burden I'd been carrying since childhood. The weight of seeking approval from someone incapable of giving it. My house feels different now. Quieter, but in a peaceful way. I've repainted the living room, rearranged furniture, made it fully mine. Sometimes I look at family photos and feel a twinge of what might have been, but never regret. I heard Ashlyn had her baby, a girl named Lily. She sends photos occasionally. I save them in a folder but rarely look at them. Maybe someday. For now, I'm building something I never had before, a life without manipulation, without the obligation of toxic loyalty. It's not always easy, and sometimes the silence is deafening, but it's honest. And honest is something my family never was.